Hope everybody had a nice weekend. So today we're going to talk a little bit about some of the issues that you might face as a pharmacy director or as the pharmacist in charge at a community hospital or even at a community pharmacy, or at your institutional or hospital in your towns around the state and country, depending on how much responsibility or inventory you have to do. But there are some things to think about. We'll talk about the NCPA digest a little bit more. So, just if I gave this question on the quiz, which of the following statements regarding inventory turnover is true? It's a ratio of how many times the inventory is sold and replaced over a given period. The higher or faster the inventory turnover, the more inefficient the company is in managing your inventory. And it allows for comparisons of your pharmacy to industry averages. A and C, or A, B, and C, or A, B, or C. A and C I hear here. Any other options? What about A, B, and C? That looks pretty good to me. What's wrong with B? Inefficient. That's right. That's good. So it's A and C, and it shows the inefficiency if you have a lower inventory. So that higher number tells you that you're bringing it in the door and you're selling it. And what does that do? That means that you sold it, you get your profit or gross margin from it, and then you have the money to pay the bills, and you have money to buy more inventory, and the whole cycle can keep going. Using the accrual basis for accounting, inventory purchases are recorded as cost of goods sold when the cash payment from the pharmacy is sent to the wholesaler. So you use cost of goods sold in your inventory turnover, and cost of goods sold is created when they write the check for the inventory under the accrual basis. So what's the rule? We pick false if we don't know, or we pick true if we don't know? Or the longer the sentence, the more likely it's true? I don't know what is the rule now these days. I don't remember what it was when I went to school. But anyway, it's false. And why is that false? Because we want the matching concept. That's what accrual accounting does. It gets the matching, and it matches what we earned by what did we sell, how much did it cost us to sell, and when we draw the line and get net gross profit and gross margin, and then we work our way down to net income, we know it's from exactly what we did. And you have the balance sheet with cash and accounts payable and accounts receivable, and those are the accounts that account for the timing differences. That's what they call them, timing differences, from when all the checks and bank deposits and everything, payments to the vendor, to you and everybody, all that is always in flux. But under accrual accounting, you get a clean cutoff in the matching process, and then you have a good number. Which of the following statements is or are true? Profitability measures the company's ability to meet all financial obligations. Liquidity or solvency ratios measure a company's ability to make money. And both profitability and liquidity ratios provide important information about a company's financial health, or all of the above. Don't answer at once. B. C. I think that's a pretty good one. And that's just the profitability and liquidity are inverse. So, but it's important that one tells you if you're making money, and one tells you about can you meet your company's financial obligations, and they call it a going concern, and they actually worry about that when they make a financial statement to the users, because the people who lend money to a company based on financial statements, they want to know as a going concern, are they going to make money, because everybody has a down year or two. Okay, your Pills RS direct manager, or your DM, that's what they called it when I was in practice, but I don't know what they're calling them now. But district manager called and wanted to speak to your pharmacy manager regarding some of her store's financial information. The DM specifically wanted to speak about the most controllable expense within her pharmacy, which is inventory, files, caps, and labels, payroll, or advertising. Payroll, good, because that is exactly the most, because you can control that. What do we mean by control? Well, you have control over how many hours pharmacist hours are scheduled and also how many tech hours are scheduled. And since those are expenses, you have to pay these people to do the work, whether or not anybody comes to the counter and you make any sales. So matching, your payroll requirements or your staffing requirements, you always want to have peak efficiency. So we talked a little bit about this, the NCPA Digest for the National Community Pharmacists Association, and it's put out by Cardinal Health, and it just talks about all sorts of different things. I think I have a copy up on ELC, where you can just Google and find the latest NCPA and look through it. But some of the highlights are, they talk about prescription volume decrease from 2016 to 2017. Just not very much, but likely due in part to the 90-day fill requirements. And so that would be obvious if PBMs are requiring you to get 90 days. What are you going to do with your prescription count? You're not going to be filling it as often, so that makes sense. Patients being steered to PBM owner mail order pharmacy, so that's an obvious one, because if you used to fill all these people and they came in your door and now they just do it from home with mail order, that's going to be and obviously a decrease. And then exclusionary pharmacy network arrangements, that's where just you can only go to certain pharmacies based upon your insurance reimbursement. Generic drugs comprise 84% of all prescriptions dispensed. That doesn't seem unusual to me. We're using more and more generics because they're a lot cheaper, and supposedly the profit margin is higher on there, but I think the PBMs have taken advantage of that and whittled that down. 52% of total prescriptions are covered by Medicare Part D and Medicaid programs. And what do you think will happen with that in the future? Stay constant, go down, go up? What do we know about? Is any section of the population aging? Baby boomers. I can relate to that. So, yes, it's true, we're getting older. 90% of community pharmacy are offering some type of medication adherence program. So, you might see that in your store, and so they have that 5-star rating, and they get cognitive services, they get MTM. If they do it right and they bill for it, then that's a whole process that we don't have time to get into. And below cost reimbursements, exacerbated by these fees to Medicare Part D, contribute to gross margins falling by 5% over the past years. And is 5% a big deal when you're speaking gross margin? Remember I said they go crazy over half a point or 1 point. So 5 points on the independent side is really quite concerning. And we showed that slide about pharmacies that are operating at loss. Over, I think, 19% of them are operating at loss, and then 40% of them operate at less than 1% net income. So it's a significant problem for the independent pharmacies or small chains. So again, here was some information from the new one, and again, they show sales, cost of goods sold, gross profit at 22% or 23%. So, and then payroll expense is relatively 13 or 14%, and they just show that much information, whereas compared to the one in 2007, which was a 10-year average, they actually carried it all the way down and showed operating expenses, total expenses, and net operating income. And you see that that was 3 or 4%, and then in 2007, and if you looked at 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, those years, that this bottom line was probably negative, And so they didn't want to show that, so they went to just showing limited financial information and just showing the big number of sales, cost of sales, gross profit, and payroll expenses. Now, I think here they're showing gross profit as a percentage, and that's a point of distinction of, some people use gross profit as the money, the actual amount. Some say gross profit is a percent, but for class, I was consistent, and gross profit is what I will use if I put it on the test. The gross profit is the dollar amount, and the gross margin is the percentage amount. So they use gross profit as a percentage, but I really think that that should be gross margin. Because when you read a lot of the review, they say profits are down, and that implies the dollar amount, and then they say margins slipped, or margins have been cut by 1 or 2%. So that's just a difference in the terminology of how they use it. And so how do pharmacist services affect gross margin? Up or down? So if you want to figure it out, what do you do when you do a pharmacist service? You provide a service, you do blood pressure screening or diabetic counseling or something like that, and then you ask for what? Reimbursement, some sort of cash. And that's what? A revenue. It's money coming to the company. So your sales would go up. What about the cost of goods sold? How much inventory do you use to do those things? And then you have the gross profit or gross margin line, and then there's payroll, and that is where your time went. So if you're saying, does it affect gross margin, how would it affect it? Increase it, right? It's very lucrative because it's 100% gross margin. You have no inventory associated with it, so if that's money coming in the doors and there's no inventory, that's all gravy to you and involves on the financial statement like that. And then what happens to your net operating income? It goes up also, because what happens with the payroll? They pay you whether you're there or not, right? Don't they have, don't love the change? I look on Facebook on cynical pharmacists, I think, and they talk about the challenges in pharmacy practice, and management keeps asking you to do more and more, and they have flu shots. And so where do flu shots come in? That's extra money, but they don't give you extra time, they don't give you extra help. So payroll's going to stay the same. So what's going to happen with the net income? It's going to go up by the same amount as the gross margin went up. So you see how you can anticipate the numbers, and that's how we'll talk about it. That's what budgeting is just saying, well, if this happens, we know what the amount will be or the effect will be, and this is what we want to achieve. And so then they prepare a budget and present that to you. Did anybody ever think about cost of dispensing? What do we mean by cost of dispensing? It's the average cost of dispensing for all pharmacies is $11.20, up from $10.98. And then there's a big reference, but here, what does it say? All operating costs, interest, and income tax expenses divided by the net sales. So all that says is, on average, that's how much it costs to give out a prescription. So when you, years ago when Walmart came up with a $4 prescription, the cost of dispensing was probably $8 or $9. And all of us here at college were going like, really, how are they doing that? When every prescription, if you add up all the costs of the pharmacy, divide by the average sales, and you get, like, it costs $11.21 for you to process a prescription. I don't know if you've ever thought of it that way, that's what the cost of dispensing means. So when you want to sell somebody a prescription for $8, are you making any money? You're not making a profit, you're making money, and you're bringing in some sort of sales, and there's, you know, terms for that, and it's a good thing. But you are selling at a loss, but on average, the cost of dispensing is about $11.21. And we just put this in. Dr. Perry wrote a chapter on that. You see this book, Financial Analysis in Pharmacy Practice. Dr. Perry and I and Brent Rollins, he was a graduate student. We wrote this about 2012. You can find it probably for $1 on eBay or Amazon or something, but it gives some good information. And like I said, Dr. Perry wrote the chapter on that if you're interested in figuring it up and stuff, if anybody ever thought about it. But like when you go to the pharmacy and there's gifts and so forth, that's there to create more revenue and more sales. I know one pharmacist out in Washington, Georgia, years ago, he sold pool supplies out in Washington to the surrounding area, and that was his biggest item. And he made the most money for the entire year. And then he had a lunch counter, and that came in second. And then the pharmacy part, the drugs, came in third, fourth after the gifts up front and so forth. And so that's kind of sad when you think about it, that the pharmacy is selling all these other things other than direct, than what they're in business for. So we talked about inventory being one of the pharmacy's largest investments. And why do I say investment? Because it takes money to have pharmacy, to have inventory on the shelf, because you have to pay for that. And if it's just sitting there, it's a use of your funds. And while it may not seem, you may not see the effect of it or have a direct care about it, but from the corporate standpoint, they have cash needs and they've had to pay all the vendors to get that to you. And if you don't sell it, they're not getting any money back to pay for it or to pay your paycheck and so forth. So we'll talk a little bit about purchasing objectives, the balance between having too much or too little on hand, and the turnover and Pareto's law. Just some, I think they're just interesting facts that you should know about. And so this is from CVS a couple years ago, from 2016. So you see inventories were 15.6%. This is their consolidated balance sheet. And again, they show the horizontal analysis and year-to-year comparison. So they're showing all these numbers. And what do we know about this? It's as of a certain date, so you know that they're comparable, because this wasn't in March around Easter time when it might have been higher or lower, or this wasn't around whatever. They're both at the end of the year on the same date, so they're comparable if they went up or down. And it looks like their cash went up, their inventories, look at how close those numbers are. And this is the consolidated, so this is for all of the CVSs. So I think that brings the point home of they're going to keep you on a tight rope and say, the number you have is too high, you need to bring it down, you need to sell or return those items that you want to have in stock. In fact, when I was in practice at Eckerd, it was just when specialty pharmacy, when all the injectables started coming, Humira, they used to say you can't have any Humira in the fridge. You have to order it when the patient comes in. And we had like 5 or 6 patients on it. So we wanted one in the fridge because someone would come in almost once a week. But they said, no, you can't have one. And so we had to tell our patients, no, we'll put in the order and it'll be here tomorrow. And then if the warehouse was out of it, it came the next day. So it affects patient care, but I'm just relating that story is that's what corporate will actually put constraints on what you can have and what you can order. And then again, they've got a lot of goodwill and intangible assets. I think a lot of that comes from their image, and when they buy stores, they use the balance sheet and to different consolidations. I'm not sure what's in there, but it's a pretty high number, I think. But in a normal company, goodwill and intangibles are going to be a lot smaller. But you can see the important thing here is the inventory is so close. And so when you think about how much stores CVS has, I think it brings home the point. But here's a little humor to keep you awake. Does anyone have a suggestion for reducing our inventory? Someone says, let's sell it to our customers. And then the CEO, does that work? And then the guy says, well, feel free to tell that to the board that it's your idea. We're going to giggle out of it. That's good. I like it too. Anyway, so what we want to do for purchasing, we want to get the right product, the right quantity, the right time, the right price, and the right vendor. So I think that parallels with the patient when we want to get the right drug and the right time and the right dosage form and so forth. So the right product for a community, you would have to worry about your prescription medications, specialty. Do you have any specialty needs? Like I just talked about the Humira or HIV or whatever you're going to process. FC drugs are really expensive, so Dr. Seagraves would be worried about how much he has on the shelf. And then you prescriber habits. So what do we mean about that? Well, you just know that over time and experience and working at a pharmacy, you know what the doctors are writing for. If there's a special antibiotic, you want to have that on hand so you always have it available to give to your patients, to sell to your patients. Conversely, you don't want to have something that no one ever writes for. So if there's a drug that you see and you get it on your shelf and then no one's writing for it, well, that's not one that you want to keep. So you'll see inventory reports might even have turnover by item. If you ever think about that, we do the inventory turnover, but with computers and the home office having the information, they might give you selected items that have a turnover that are really, really slow, and then you would have to address those. Some other things, you have the front store, you have over-the-counter or self-care stuff, herbals, cards, gifts, beer, wine, food, and all that. So a lot of stores are going into that, but certainly the Walgreens and the CVS's, they have a big line of Cokes and all that. And what did they used to have? I don't know that they have it that much, but when I, 20 years ago, what was a really big thing for pharmacy for the chains to have? Tobacco, and then they got rid of that. And before all these cell phones and stuff came around, photographs, people used to have to take them on something called film, and then they had to take it to someplace to be what they call developed. And then when it came back, they gave it to you in a little envelope, and then you looked through them at the counter, and you said, and so you had to wait. But now we have a whole different environment, but Photoshops, the photo was a big thing for, I can remember that, and that would be the late 90s. DME, so canes, ostomy, splints, that sort of thing. And then a lunch counter in some of the smaller cities. There definitely can be very profitable. We have one over here, Ad Drug. Does anybody work at Ad? Has anybody ever been to Ad Drug?
Post office.
Do you like going there to the counter? Food is delicious, so I think they make a good chicken sandwich or something I see on Facebook. And who owns Ad Drug? Kevin Florence. He's a graduate here. I remember him. His father was at GPHA when I was involved with GPHA, and he owned several pharmacies, and his mother was a pharmacist. So it was natural that I think that Kevin went into independent ownership, and he owns Ad Drug, which is over in 5 Points here in Athens. And then an institution, you have what they call formulary developed by the P&T committee. And so what does the formulary do for inventory? There you go, keeps it small or controllable. So what were you going to say? No, I mean, yeah, well, in a way, it keeps determined how long you're going to keep it on the shelf by saying, well, we're going to use a formulary, which is X number of products for all these different disease states, and then what? Everybody has to kind of agree to use those products, and then what's going to happen? They're going to go in and off the shelf, and you're going to have a better turnover and the management of the money and the cash to get them. And that's part of why they have the formulary, so that, you don't have to have 18,000 line items in your inventory. You can keep it down to maybe 4,000 or 2,000 or whatever it is, but a doctor all the doctors have to agree that this is what they want. I mean, there's always exceptions and stuff, but the P&T committee is trying to keep tabs on how many different items you have. And again, you know there's lots, so like beta blockers, you don't have to have all of them, or ACE inhibitors, you don't have to have all of them, so you substitute and just try to focus on just a few items. And then drug budgets are set by the hospital administration. By that I think they mean like what is their inventory level. So they're telling them this is how much money you have and you have to watch it and keep it in here. So the right quantity, so in community, you try to keep stuff on the shelf that you know is being sold, and you order every night, but you run out during the day, and what do we usually say? Well, we can order it and we'll have it in tomorrow. So it's not really that difficult in the community, but you do have those instances where you have to call around and try to find it for the patient, or have him or her go to that store to get it because it's an emergency. In the institution and out of stock has more significant consequences, and why is that? Yeah, is it a serious disease state and the patient's in your hospital, in your bed, and has been ordered and he needs the dose? And so it's a little more serious in the hospital. So it's tricky to have the right quantity, and they use something called stock depth. So that's how many bottles of Lipitor or Crestor do you keep on the shelf, and that's your review time and lead time, which is the purchasing cycle and calling and placing the order and then having it shipped. You know, in the community, it's mostly one day, right? We punch it in at night, or the computer automatically orders it, and the next day we get it. But there's a formula there. You don't really have to know it for the exam, but just to let you know that the people who work in inventory management, they have different formulas and different ways of looking at this. The right time to order, again, why is time? Again, so you don't have too much of one product, and they call those inventory carrying costs. And the biggest one is the cash required to finance the inventory. So if they don't have inventory, if they don't have enough to pay the vendor, what do they have to do? They have to go out and borrow it. And again, you don't see that, but that's corporate, and they're borrowing money to pay for inventory that might be getting dusty on your shelves. Storage costs. So if you have a warehouse that your stuff comes from, if everybody's over ordering, what's the warehouse going to do? The warehouse is going to order more and have more there. And warehouses are big. They have lots of shelves and forklifts and people moving them. And I think we've all seen videos about how Amazon completes orders and all these conveyor belts. Well, your inventory warehouse for a pharmacy, some of these big PBMs and so forth, it might not be that much different. And then one you probably never thought of is the cost of risk, is insurance or obsolescence. So if it sits on the shelf, it has the potential for going bad or being damaged, and then you have to insure that. So you have to pay a company to pay maybe flood insurance, and we just saw that with Hurricane Florence in the southeast. And so there's all sorts of costs associated with having the inventory ordered at the right time. So remember what I told you about our example from the inventory turnover, that at each store, it can, 2% borrowing rate, it could be $15 million. It could be a savings from a corporate standpoint if you just lowered your inventory at each store. So it does have an effect. What about the right price? Obviously, we want quantity discounts, but what happens if you buy everything on quantity? I used to work at an independent up here, Colbert Drugs, and he'd have warehouses, people calling him, and he'd go, okay, I'll take 12 bottles of he did a lot of narcotics and so forth, but he would have 12 bottles of, say, potassium chloride. And because they'd say, well, if you buy it by a case, so he'd have 12 bottles. And then he'd buy something else. So you get these discounts, but then you might have too many, and then you might have too much inventory. And from the vendor standpoint, they give you a reduction for paying on time. So that's when we're talking about the cycle, that you want to sell it and then bill it to the insurance company, get the money in so you can pay it to the vendor. Well, the vendor is doing the same thing, trying to run their company of buying inventory and selling the inventory to you and then replacing it. So they offer price reductions, 2% net 10 days. That doesn't sound like a lot, 2%, but they say we normally give you 30-day turnaround. Most of you see that on your credit card. You have 25 days to pay it, and so that's the same thing with vendors. They say, well, pay us by in 30 days, but if you get paid within 10 days and you cut the check really quickly, we'll give you 2%. So should the company borrow to take advantage of it? And then product bundling, that's in one of the articles we talked, that's up there on, I think, on ELC. And so bundling, they'll say, well, we'll give you a discount on this, but you have to call this OTC product, or we'll give you the potassium chloride, but you have to take some magnesium, or you have to take some toothpaste or something. And is that a good deal? Do you want that product bundling? And then minimum purchasing, again, that's from the warehouse standpoint. We're not going to bother shipping you 2 bottles of something. You have to order 1 tote full or 15 items or something. Oops. And then the last one, the right vendor. So community pharmacies, a lot of independents have had what they call buying groups or co-ops. So this is most prevalent in the independents. The pharmacy out in Washington, I remember he was in one that was out in Indiana or Oklahoma somewhere, and it was a national buying group, and it was and this is, if you ever think about it, this is an opportunity to be an entrepreneur and find a niche and create a job, and you find this, and you get all these companies, all these individual pharmacies to say, we'll order through this company, and then you promise to deliver them, and then you get quantity discounts, your buying power for purchasing larger quantities than just one store can do. So whoever invented that he doesn't practice pharmacy anymore, he probably just sits there and manages the people buying and selling the inventory for all these members that are around the country. And then in an institution, they call them group purchasing organizations, and that is in the article that's on for Friday. And what do you get through that? Economies of scale, and then economy of scale. What is that? You order the right amount, and you might order more, or take bigger orders and have fewer deliveries, so you're not delivering every day. They'll say, okay, let's just say we ship to you once, and we'll discount that price rather than shipping to you every day. And you see that on Amazon. They say, well, if you buy $50, it's free shipping. If it's $49.99, you pay $12 or whatever. And then they have Amazon Prime. If you pay the $12, you get it next day for the whole year. So that's economies of scale. Delivery schedule, recurrent out of stocks. How do they handle that? Because a great price from a vendor is no good if they never have it in stock. And I don't know how many people have had to face a patient who comes in the next day and what you ordered didn't come in the tote. It's really hard to say, well, they didn't, they usually have it and they don't. Sometimes they will be nice about it, and sometimes they'll get really upset, maybe justly so. All right, so there's several types of inventory. The visual is just scanning the shelves. That doesn't look right. A lot of independent owners, they get experience in that, and you will if you're a store manager. You know that the fast movers should look like this and have so many bottles, the depth of the bottles, and that you have so many extras on there. And then the accounting systems, the paperwork, or the behind the scenes is a perpetual or periodic. And perpetual is the most used, and I'll show you an example of that. But all places utilize a physical inventory, and that's an actual count of all items on hand at a specific time. So how many have seen that where they have professional counters come through the pharmacy early morning or late afternoon? So you've seen that. What do they have on their? So it's a bunch of people from one company. It's an outside company. They're experts at it. They have little clickers on their belt or computers on their hands or scanners or whatever. I don't know what the technology is because I've seen them 20 years ago, but they came through. Sometimes they came in and you had to open early and they were there at 5 a.m. till 7 a.m. They're clicking away and counting, and like you said, they blast through it, they count everything, the baker cells, whatever you mentioned. So you have to get a complete count, and that's partially required for financial statements too. And this is the excerpt from the CDS. I just highlighted some things just to emphasize some of the points that I've been talking about. Reduce the value of our ending inventory for estimated inventory losses. So what do? They count the inventory, they total it up, and they say, well, you should have had $1 million, but you only have $950,000, so your $50,000 loss. So what do you do on the financial statements? Well, you write it off, they call it writing it off, but you lower the value of inventory by the $50,000. And what principle does that cover? Conservatism, right? When we said financial statements are conservative, so why would you put $1 million when you just counted it and there's only $950, so they write it down. So physical inventory counts are taken on a regular basis in each store, and I think this is interesting. It's a continuous cycle count. So what that means is, again, they have like 7,500 stores. They cycle it, so some of them are done in March, some of them are done in April, some of them are done in June, and they just cycle. So every store has been counted at least once a year or twice a year, but they rotate all the different stores from different times. So if they're using one company, they can fly around and count them or whatever, but they don't have to get all 7,500 stores on one day. And again, here, if they're losing money through theft or obsolescence, current physical inventory loss trends. So by doing that, what does that financial information give them? That gives management something to say, well, gee, this store is continually losing money. Why is the inventory show on the book what we generate that it's always higher than what's on the shelf? To me, that shows it's either being destroyed or it's being stolen. I mean, there's not too many ways a bottle of liquor doesn't go off the shelf. Either sold or it's knocked off and destroyed, or someone lifts it, puts it in their pocket. I mean, and I've seen a lot of that, both from pharmacists and from techs over the years. So even though it's an isolated, we know all these people, and everybody trusts everybody, it can happen. So proper inventory levels, too high. So what happens if you have too high of an inventory? Well, you can get obsolete or damaged or out of dates. So I think that's pretty obvious if you think in community pharmacy, even at a hospital, you don't want, if you think about fluids and so forth. I can remember going through St. Mary's, and again, this is 25 years ago, but you look and you see some boxes on the floor and they'd be broken or a gurney or something hit them or whatever, and so it was damaged, and so I would think, well, they probably have to write that off. But use of cash resources, you have to pay for that whether or not you sell it or not. So if you can't store it properly and keep it from getting damaged or going out of date, that's a use of cash resources. So what did we say about too much inventory? It's a drain on cash. It's a cash flow use, and that might increase company borrowing and interest expense, higher interest. And so then what would the company have to do? They'd have to do higher prescription costs to cover that. And so what would happen? Less profits available for pay raises or technician support. And what's the biggest expense on the pharmacy side? Is payroll. And if they can control that and say, well, we've had inventory losses from obsolete or theft, and we can't devote as much payroll to this store, so what does that mean? You're there from 7 to 7 without tech help, or you get tech help from 11 to 5 instead of 9 to 9. And I'm saying they will do that. I've worked a lot of chains and worked by myself a lot of nights. Then the converse is true. What if it's too low? Well, the biggest thing is I think it's a decrease in proper patient care, because you have a loss of sales in the lack of the drug. So people will go elsewhere if they don't want to wait till you get it. It's an increased workload in the pharmacy. And what do I mean by that? Not having something on the shelf to fill a prescription, why does that cause more work? You've all done it. Well, I should say most of you have done it. What do? You give them 3 and say, we'll fill the rest tomorrow. And so, to me, it's 2 labels, 2 vials, 2 bags, 2 running it out front, and the whole thing. You've looked at it twice, and that's money. Time is money. Money is your activity is your time, and so it's an increased workload. Then this one, increased customer complaints, because you're going to reach a point where nobody's happy with you, and they come in and get 5 prescriptions, and only one of them is completely full, and 4 of them have a problem. Pretty soon, they're not going to be coming to you anymore. And poor performance evaluation, because who is corporate going to blame? The patients say, well, they're just too demanding. No, they're probably going to not give you a good performance, and then the profits of the company will come down. And what does that mean? Less profits available for pharmacists' pay raises and technician support. So it does, in the long run, affect you guys on having the proper inventory amount. Perpetual inventory is just they count it. The physical inventory is count to reconcile it, but someone in the background is writing down what you buy and what you sell, and they keep an individual record of it. It's not very hard with a computer, but you see here is just one ledger card for, say, atorvastatin 40 milligrams, 100 count bottles, and it just starts out on one day, you buy 300, and then they say purchases, costs, balance on hand. So you bought 300 bottles. We have 300 bottles at $5 a tab is 1,500, and so the math works out. And then when you sell 60, this goes down, and your costs go down. And then when you buy more, it just goes up. So you can do the math. We won't go through it, but what am I trying to show there? It's perpetual. At any point in time, they can look at it and say, well, you should have this on hand. And the computer will spit out a number, and it says you should have 4 bottles of Lipitor on the shelf. And if you don't, something's wrong. Either you didn't get a shipment, or you gave someone too much overtime, or someone's stealing, or you're having damage that you don't know about. So all those numbers just come out, and it just gives you an average total of what your balance on hand is. So obsolete inventory can't be sold, it's damaged, excessive levels, and cost of obsolete and outdated drugs goes directly to cost of goods sold. So if you increase cost of goods sold without any sales to offset it, what happens to your gross margin? It'll go down. And will management like that? I don't think so, because decreases in gross margin gets management's attention. Then they call that shrink, like when they count it. Again, they have the book inventory, or what you should have. They count it. You're 2 or 3% over, or you're 2 or 3% under. Usually it's under, and shrink. And it says here, a national retail survey said 1.44% of sales was the estimate of what shrink would be. So it's only 1.4%, but on an individual basis, it can add up. And the most common cause of shrinkage is theft, usually by employees. And then budgeting for what you guys will get mostly at the community, you'll get an itemized list. You'll have sales projections. They'll want you to maybe fill 200 a day or whatever, and your costs and expenses. And if you look at a report, an actual versus a budget, and then they'll probably have historical. What will they have on overtime? How much will they have in overtime? 0. They never budget for overtime. And so I used to do this where I showed something from CVS that I got years ago, and I found it was interesting that for a year report, the overtime line was 0. Like, really? They just won't let you have any overtime or more tech help. And then sometimes you just get a cash budget that shows you where your money's going. That might be more institutional, and an expense tells you how much payroll you should be spending, and how much your drug costs should be. And then capital budget is for long-term items that you're going to buy, like a new computer system or a new dispensing system, new shelving, an entirely new wing in the hospital, or a new building, or something like that. And then how do they develop these? I'm not real big on budgets. You just have to give them the, management will send them out. They've done last year's budget, plus or minus. So some companies say, let's do last year plus 5%. We want to do 5% growth, so they'll change every line by 5%. Industry norm, that's where we go. Financial statements can be compared, are comparable. So we'll say, well, what's Walgreens doing? What is CVS doing? And then the corporate norm would be, well, what does our average store do when we open one up? This is what I opened a CVS back in '98, and it was an HIV pharmacy, but they gave us the budget for a regular store. And again, what do we know about HIV drugs? Even back then, they were expensive. So they gave us a sales projection of like $1 million, and what was our sales projection? 2.5 or something like that, because I told you our average prescription cost was $150, whereas the average prescription cost on their normal store, on the corporate norm, was $50. So we were way above that. So we made them a lot more money, and our bonus was still $500. And maybe that's why I don't appreciate budgets. And then the budget's perfect? No, they're only estimates, and that's what you have to remember. They'll act like they're law, but they are only estimates. And just like with all investments with stocks and stuff, they always say past performance is not an indicator of future performance. But when it comes to budget, they always say, well, if you did X last year, you can do X plus 10% this year. And so they'll always give you aggressive and challenging. This one, we won't go through because we'll do that on Friday. Institutional, there's an actual paper on there, ASHP guidelines on medication cost management strategies. It's from 2008, but they do this, but continue the budgeting process throughout the year through constant vigilance and monitoring drug use. So, it's got to be important if they wrote a paper on it and it got published, right? And so what's the most controllable expense? Payroll, and then proper inventory management. So we have an assignment for you that you can work on in your groups. We have about 10 minutes more, but it's not due till Friday before class time, I think at 11 o'clock. Yeah, 11 a.m. It's on ELC, and I'll publish that in just a minute. But look at that. So we want the problem, the case, and then projected revenue, costs of goods sold, gross profit, and gross margin. And last year, this went very well. The groups were very, they all got together, and then when you work on it with other people, maybe some of this stuff clings on, different words and different theories might cling on differently in different people. And so they were very good, and we had a good discussion about the outcomes. And we'll talk about that next Friday. And that's all I got. Any questions? And then I'll publish. And then I think your groups, they're by Canvas. They're all in ELC. If anybody has a problem, just email me. But I think they were done by your Strength Finder. Linda Dove did them. And so, oops.
I just got them.
I did it late, so. What are we doing? There we go.
Yeah, like why would you make that?
We're already sitting in that.
So there's the case number 4, and the cost of expense. It's a little the chapter that Dr. Perry wrote. So It's very thorough, just for interest, if anybody wants to see more about that in the NCPA digest. And we just need one case per group.
Just for clarification, this is not our therapy group, this is another group.
Right, these are the groups for this course that are in the LC. They were advised by your, by that strength finder assignment that we had earlier in the course. Yeah,
Where did you go to?
I'm sorry.
I was wondering, this is probably a stupid question, but does the cost of dispensing include the cost to the pharmacy of the actual drug or not?
No,
Thank God.
it does not, and that wasn't a stupid question. It's like if you want to get an Naltril and the drug costs me 42 cents. In fact, that's a good question because I use a local pharmacy.
And Paul.
Andy Ulrich's up there on Hawthorne, and Blue Cross Blue Shield paid 32 cents for 90 days of an Naltril. And I said, I feel really bad coming to you because a vial was a quarter. It costs you a quarter. Excuse me, could we have